So today I'm really excited to talk about why an avoidant man doesn't fight for a relationship and what you can do about it. I'm really excited to have Bev Mitelman in the house. She is the founder of Securely Loved, a certified attachment coach. Welcome, Bev.
Thank you, Jonathan. So happy to be back here with you and your audience. And we had such a good time last year when we did this. So I'm thrilled to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. And by the way, my sincere apologies. I butchered your last name.
That's okay. I've heard worse. So it's Bev Mitelman.
Middleman. Anyways, so we're going to talk about love attachment, but let's differentiate the difference between love and love attachment. Can we explain to some of the newbies what love attachment is?
Absolutely. So I know we went through this, the first time that we met last year, but I think it's a great idea to sort of review it again. Yeah. So the idea of love attachment or attachment styles is really a set of patterning, learned behavior that we learned usually very early in our childhood vis-a-vis the relationship that we had with our caregivers. So when we talk about attachment styles, we talk in general terms about two categories. The first category being secure. Okay. And the second category being insecure. Now, I just want to be clear with folks that when we're talking about attachment styles, we're talking about, again, learned behavior. This has nothing to do with mental illness. It has nothing to do with mental disease. It's really learned behavior. And the terms themselves sometimes can be a bit misleading, right? The term insecure. Yeah. So we all have insecurities, right? That's just part of being human. But insecure is the word that we give in terms of you have secure attachment and you have insecure attachment. Okay. Now, secure attachment happens when a child is in an environment where they receive, for the most part, consistent love, affection, care. They're given space to feel their feelings and to communicate, and they learn that they can rely, for the most part, on their caregivers, right? So it sounds nice, right? You're thinking, sure. That's
Ozzie and Harriet, the whole Rockwell painting, that sort of thing.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that picturesque, but, for the most part, the child was given that space to be their authentic self. And if they needed support or they had an emotional need, they could communicate that and their parents would respond for the most part with consistency. So what that results in is a child who feels very comfortable in themselves. Okay. And in the presence of others. And relationships feel safe to them because they had a safe relationship with the people who were, the earliest people that they loved in their life. So that set a pattern, right? Now, where we end up spending a lot of time is talking about those folks who unfortunately didn't come out of the same type of homes. And who developed as a result an insecure attachment. Now, it's a little difficult to gauge exact numbers, but for the most part, we typically say that it's about 50% of the population in North America who have a secure attachment. And then we'll say, the other 50, the other half of our population falls more into the insecure attachment area.
Now, by the way, can I interrupt for a second?
Of course.
I don't agree with those statistics, and I only say this. I honestly don't believe it, and I know even the book Attached by Amir Levine says that. I really question the validity of that statistic, but let's just go for argument's sake that that's true. But I honestly don't. It doesn't even register given how many dysfunctional relationships and divorces and all the things that happen, which is partly due to love attachment style, why they don't work. So anyway, just let's keep going with this though.
Yeah, it's a complex question, right? Yeah. In terms of why there's such a high rate of divorce now, and attachment styles definitely is one factor.
Yes.
So if we just if we accept this statistic for what it is, and we say the other half of the population has insecure attachment, it's important to note that insecure attachment falls along a continuum. Yeah. So there are three subcategories in this insecure attachment. So either you're secure, that's one whole category onto itself, or you're insecure. And then within the insecure, there could be 3 possible variations of that. Now, the first one on one end of the continuum is the anxious preoccupied. Okay, now, this is the individual who has as their core wounds a fear of abandonment. So they would have experienced in childhood, to sort of summarize it really quickly, they would have experienced some form of abandonment or perceived abandonment. And so generally these individuals grow up and they're the folks that often feel lonely. They're often sad. They're the folks who, if you have a friend like this, who might, for example, feel excluded, feel left out. They might be a little clingy. They're the folks that the internet likes to call needy. I'm not really a fan of those internet memes when we talk about drama and needy. And so, because we all have needs. But these folks are really the ones that use activating strategies to close the gap in the proximity. So they're always in proximity to the person that they love. Okay, so they can never be too close.
You said it's about abandonment, but you also said something earlier. I'm curious. In a secure environment, the child is allowed to be themselves. It occurs to me that in child rearing, one of the things we do as parents is kind of stifle a child from being themselves to conform with, whether it's going to the grocery store, whether it's being at school. There's a constant, shift of conformity that doesn't allow the child to be themselves. So does the anxious, for example, is it always about abandonment, or could it be that they were stifled for who they are as well? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay. So the way our society is set up, almost every child experiences micro traumas as they grow up, just in terms of how we discipline them, right? So you're right. Yeah. If they don't go to school, or if they act up in the supermarket, that's perceived to be bad behavior, and children are often punished for this. So I don't know if you listen to Gabor Mate. He talks a lot about child rearing, and he reflects on his own experience as a parent. So he says that really the best thing you can do is allow the child to have their emotions, right? Right time, right place. So if someone is, if your child and your toddler is screaming and they're angry at something, okay, well, maybe screaming is not the most appropriate thing. You can teach them at that point in time, I'm listening to you. Tell me what's bothering you. You don't have to scream. But what we tend to do is go to your room until you don't want to scream anymore. We shut them down.
And not to get so granular with the child, because we're obviously talking about adults. I'm more curious, the after effects of all of this. Does all of, and see, this is why I struggle with 50% or secure, because I think there are so many micro traumas that have happened for those of us who are adults, whether we're a baby boomer or a millennial, which is the predominant demographic of my audience. It has to have had some lasting effects on how we operate in relationship. But we can go down another rabbit hole, and I want to bring it back to you were describing anxious, but I know you want to go to the other two.
So I took a little note. I take notes as we talk, because we definitely should come back to the topic of what's really the difference between secure and insecure in adulthood. Yeah. What does it look like? Yeah. So we can circle back to that. So just to finish my thought, along the continuum, you have the anxious preoccupied, and then you also have the dismissive avoidant. Now, again, these folks, they had childhood experiences, usually around neglect. Right. So at some point, they learned that they could not rely on their caregivers to consistently respond to their needs. And so these folks often learn to repress their needs and go at it alone. So self-reliance, they became overly self-reliant because they had almost an attitude of, why would I bother to ask? My needs aren't going to be met anyways. I'm just going to depend on myself. So that's the modeling that they received, right? So now I'm talking in extremes. Okay. Now, somewhere in the middle is the fearful avoidance. And the fearful avoidance is the most complex out of all of the attachment styles.
Oh,
It is. It's the most complex, and it's also actually the rarest. And the fearful avoidant, oftentimes we see they come out of homes where there's abuse.
okay.
And again, it's any type of abuse, really. But there was a lot of chaos, a lot of unpredictability. The caregivers, at some point in time, the child was afraid of the caregiver. So you develop this sense of the child really wants comfort from the person that they love, but the person that they love also really scares them.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're yelling at them, they're hitting them, or they're unpredictable, or they're punishing them, extremely. There's so many variations. So the core wound that the fearful avoidant carries around is, I will be betrayed.
Okay.
That's a tough one. So I know I went through that at lightning speed.
Okay. So you and I were having a conversation before when we talked a few weeks ago. We kind of said many of the complex problems in relationship centers around love attachment conflict, if you will. And so I started this conversation, and we're going to talk about why an avoidant man doesn't fight for a relationship in a second. But, many people perceive that they love another human being. I love this person. Oh my God, I'm so in love with them. Yada, 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 yada. But and yet at the same time, they're miserable in the relationship, which is really fascinating to me. So you profess all this love for this person, but you're miserable at the same time, which tells me you are most likely attached to a person in some sort of unhealthy way, which is love attachment. So, how should we differentiate between, is real love just simply secure attachment, and unhealthy love is, conflicting love attachment styles or insecure attachment styles? Is that kind of the differentiation?
So this is tough because we all define love differently, right? We all have. So if you were to close your eyes and you were to think for a moment of love, I would ask you, what image and what emotion comes to mind for you, Jonathon?
The TV show Heart to Heart.
Okay.
That was aired in 1979. That to me was what a healthy couple looks like in relationship. And I'm not actually joking. I'm being radically sincere. Okay.
I believe
that's my picture of it, because I can honestly say that I don't think I've actually ever been in a healthy, secure, loving relationship.
Okay.
I am now, as I, connect the dots backward and peel the onion of my past relationships, I think I have a propensity to choose fearful, avoidant women. Well, maybe one of them was dismissive avoidant, but I'm pretty certain that they're fearful avoidant. And in addition, they have a propensity to not be very emotionally expressive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I associate a person who isn't emotionally expressive, which sometimes is known as emotionally unavailable, which I think some people categorize that. I just differentiate. They've struggled being emotionally expressive. It's rare that they're emotionally expressive, and so I associate that with avoidance. So I honestly don't know what love is, other than the fantasy of this TV show. And honestly, for the 50 plus years I've been on this planet, or 40 years of adulthood, that's been my vision. It's not. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but that's been my vision.
So I'm going to push you a little bit because it's such a great example. So when you closed your eyes and I asked you to think of love, this image came to mind, right? You said heart.
Yeah, and I was thinking in the context of romantic love. So I wasn't thinking about my children or pets or things like that.
Fair. Can you describe for me one or two emotions that came up at the same time where you saw the image?
Kindness, compassion, teamwork, care. Um,
Emotions, emotions. What did you feel? Where did you feel it in your body?
oh, I felt it around here.
Was it like a warmth, like a nice feeling?
I smiled. I mean, from that perspective, it feels warm.
So I just, the reason that I asked you to do that is because everyone knows what love is. They have a different definition, and it's stored in our subconscious. So our subconscious mind stores it. So you had no trouble when I asked you the question to dig into your subconscious mind. And you know it's your subconscious mind because what you were able to do is retrieve an image and an emotion. That's how our subconscious mind actually categorizes information. It doesn't speak the language in which you and I are speaking. There's all these little containers of emotions and imagery. So you already know what love is. So
let me be clear, because I have it as a picture like Disney and Cinderella. I mean, I'm going to say, I didn't go to any one of my particular relationships. I didn't go, and I intentionally just went romantic. I didn't go down one of those because I don't believe I've actually felt a healthy, secure, loving relationship. I've been in insecure, loving relationships where there has been, and I suspect, again, this is my supposition here, I suspect a significant percentage of people are in insecure attached relationships. Particularly, it tends to seem to be that there seems to be more avoidant men, and there just seems to be more anxious women, only because that's what all the content in the YouTube universe seems to suggest. So that's why we're diving into this conversation, because and let's move towards the title of this topic, because I observe so many women in relationship with men who are not very verbally expressive in their relationship, and B, tend to be a little bit distant, which is kind of indicative of avoidant. Some are dismissive, some are fearful. And the women are, and then whenever there's, friction in the relationship, the men kind of retreat or pull away. And the woman, and again, I'm generalizing here. I know this goes, I'm an anxious, so I know this goes the other way. Okay.
It's not gender-based.
No, I get that, but my audience seems to be the ones that fit this category more often. Why is it that an avoidant doesn't fight for a relationship, and what can somebody do when that happens?
Okay, that is a great question. So when we start to attach to someone, and I guess in this context, we're going to talk really about romantic love.
Yes.
Because we started the conversation off by what's the difference between love and love attachment. So maybe I'll start there. So love really is just a deep affection for someone or something, right? People have love for things as well. And so it's a deep affection, and we are able to connect with people on various levels, right? So intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, and also physically and sexually. So that's the distinguisher, right? So I have a deep affection and love for my children, emotionally, spiritually. Some of my friends I'm deeply connected to intellectually, right? The differentiator with the romantic love is the physical and sexual connection. Now, the utopia is to find someone that you're connected to on all four levels.
Yeah.
That is, I think, what everyone yearns for. It's like the needle in the haystack. But often what happens is that you connect with someone maybe physically and intellectually, but not emotionally.
Yeah.
So there's a disparity there, right? So what happens is when you have a fearful avoidance, or you have a dismissive avoidance man, in this case, we'll talk about a man.
Yes.
Okay. So when they start in relationships, oftentimes, again, like when you're approaching a new romantic relationship, everything's fresh. There's no commitment. There's no expectations. Like everything's nice and easy. So for the first couple of weeks and even months, there's no pressure, right? So oftentimes this individual will be very charming, very present,
Okay.
a lot of fun, very drawn in by
Yeah.
the anxious, preoccupied person. So the
Yeah.
anxious, preoccupied person generally is the one who's just spilling love. They just
Yeah.
want to be with you. They want to cheer you on. They want, they want to be your everything like tomorrow. They move at lightning speeds, but they're very generous and they're very kind. And so that's not necessarily the type of relationship that a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant has experienced in their childhood, right? They didn't
Okay.
experience kindness. So when someone comes into their sphere, they're like, wow, this is great. But when
it's a tipping point, it's like goes the other way.
right. So there is a tipping point, and that tipping point happens at a very specific point in time when that attachment starts to come online. So for example, if you and I, we were dating and we dated for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and it's been nice and casual. And then we go away for a weekend together.
Okay.
Let's just say, and we have a couple of deep talks and we start talking about the future and we start and in this scenario, let's say I'm the dismissive person and you're the anxious person, and you start bringing up the future and, what do you think? If I have at this point in time started to develop an attachment to you, that's where my fears are going to come online, right? So we talk about the attachment fears and the core wounds of the dismissive avoidance. So they don't come online. They don't surface until you're actually developed, the first layer, the first, I would say, the first part of attachment to someone, because it takes a while to develop that. So what happens is, and we see this in memes all the time, we see that, how come I went out with this guy for 3 months and everything was perfect, and then all of a sudden he pulls away?
Yeah.
Because for the first 3 months, like there were no stakes. It was easy. Like the stakes start to mount. The stakes get higher when you get into a more committed, there's more expectations, there's more responsibilities and all of that as you get further into a relationship with someone. And that's where your fears come online. So a dismissive avoidant generally will operate in this mode of feelings minus fears. Let me say that again. So
that's feelings minus fears.
Yes. So it's almost like a logical. So these folks are very logical. They're very logical. So, so it's almost like an equation if you want to think of it that way. Right. So I could, for the first couple of months, really like you. So let's say I like you 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
And are you the dismissive or you're
I'm the dismissive and you're the anxious for this scenario?
Yeah.
Okay. Now what happens is as we spend more time together and we start talking about more serious things like commitment, or we start talking about responsibilities, accountabilities, all of a sudden the fears that I have as a dismissive avoidant, which would be things like, I fear that I'll be trapped. I fear that if I let someone a little bit too close to me, they might see that I'm defective. Like there's a strong shame wound there. I fear that I might lose my freedom. I might lose my independence. All of these things start to come online. And then what happens is if they become a 9 and I only like you at an 8, that's where I start to pull back. So feelings minus fears. Now, what you generally see, this pattern holds true. So generally what happens is that if I, let's say, pull back after dating you for 3 months and I take a couple of weeks to myself, I regulate my own nervous system, and the fears that I have calmed down.
Okay.
Because I'm not feeling the pressure. There's a little bit of space between us.
Yeah.
So I'm not feeling that immediate pressure. Now it's safe for me to think about again how much it is that I liked you. And I'm reminded that I liked you an 8 out of 10. And it's at that moment that you're going to get a call from me. because now my feelings are stronger than my fears. So there's a pattern there. So how do we get around this? Well, first of all, the dismissive avoidant, this individual may or may not be aware of the fact that they're doing this.
Yes.
Okay. So, the best thing to do, if I had a magic wand, everyone would spend a little time getting to know their own mind and getting to know why they do the things that they do. Right. So, and it all goes back to our childhood and the patterns we learned and the limiting beliefs or the core wounds. So there's an equation called BTEA, which is your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions.
Okay.
So by the time a dismissive avoidant is taking action, like they're withdrawing, there was a series of thoughts, emotions, and beliefs that this person has already ruminated on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean these things are true. As humans, we are so good at telling ourselves stories.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is the story. If I enter into a relationship with Jonathon, I'm going to lose all my independence. I'm going to lose all my freedom. I don't know if that's true, but my fear is
that's a script possible, and some of those scripts I think are also reflective of adult trauma that occurs beyond the childhood trauma. I think, and I don't know if this has actually been studied, and I'm going down a rabbit hole that I don't necessarily want you to answer, but it's just a thought I have, is that many people have experienced multiple relationships. It's not, my mom and dad, my mom had one relationship her entire life of 88 years. So I think also our experiences in adulthood plays a role in this. But nonetheless, what can the anxious do when the avoidant is taking a break to regulate? Because I'm going to be candid with you. For me, if I meet another dismissive avoidant and that's how they need to regulate, then I'm done with the relationship, because I don't want to play. That's going to be an exhausting game over and over and over and over again, unless they actually have done some healing. So, and I say this as a speculation. For all I know, I could go back to an old pattern just like that. But I'm making a stand for my sovereignty, because as the anxious, it's incredibly challenging to be in relationship with an avoidant, especially either one to some degree, because they're retreating, they're running away from the problem and not addressing it right with each other. That's how I feel about it.
So it's interesting, because if you really recognize that these folks are coming from a similar place and that they both didn't have their emotional needs met in childhood, then you have a lot more empathy. You realize that
I have empathy. Oh, by the way, empathy is what keeps me in, and I've learned that empathy and grace and hope has kept me in these relationships. But at the end of the day, unless an individual does some genuinely healing in their past traumas, that's an exhausting way to be in a relationship with somebody. That's just my opinion.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I think that relationships are all about give and take. So relationships, and you talk a lot about self-love. So it's about self-love is about understanding what it is that you need. And if someone is not giving you what you need, a secure person would say, listen, this isn't for me. I wish you well, and walk away. That's what a secure person would do.
Yeah.
Right.
By the way, Bev, I want to take just a minute break to let our audience know if, by the way, if you have a question for either one of us, write the word question and then in the chat box, or post the question there after, or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. All the monies from the there's a little $ in the chat box. All the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Aslay. That's a picture of him right there. My son, who passed away almost 6 years ago. In his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process Insight Institute and scholarships to coaching as well. So if anyone has a question for us, post that question. And our goal tonight is $50. So let's get some love for the Connor Aslay Scholarship Fund. And it looks like we have our first question. So Bev, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I'll Poultry Flowers asks, could you expand on the dismissive part of dismissive avoidant? Because to me, that's what hurt the most.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. I'm not sure exactly where you want me to expand, so I'll take a stab, and if I miss the mark, let me know. Okay.
Well, I don't know. No, this is your expertise.
No, I'm saying if I miss the mark, no, I'm speaking to the individual.
Oh, okay, to poultry. Okay, got it. Yeah. Okay.
So, what flows out of our attachment style is a very, very distinct set of patterns of our core wounds. These are the limiting beliefs that we hold in our subconscious mind, our thoughts, our emotions, and our behavior, also our communication style, and also our relationship to boundaries. And so what it means is that when a dismissive is feeling like they are unsafe, what they'll do is generally they will turn to a number of coping mechanisms to deal with feeling unsafe. So if we put that in contrast to the anxious preoccupied individual will use activating strategies to come closer to the person. So what you just said, Jonathon, like you're like, listen, if something isn't working, I need to work it out right then and there, or I'm done with the relationship.
Yeah, and by the way, let me be clear. I know I sounded a bit, brash with that, but I just want to be clear. I want to be with someone who's a healthy communicator. I want to be with someone who can express their emotions and recognizing we all need a timeout sometimes to check in. But if there's a pattern of either not being emotionally expressive, or there's a pattern of retreat and not really inviting in, the union in that space, if it's, I have to bring them back in to the fold, I just don't have patience for that. That's where I'm at in my life. Someone posted, Jonathon, could you be too needy? I believe I'm worked on having healthy needs in my life, and I'm just going to make requests for my needs. If that is more than someone can give, that might mean that they're avoidant, or it just might mean we're mismatched. So anyway, to let you continue though.
So on that point, I would entirely agree with you. I think a healthy person understands exactly what they need, and they advocate for themselves, and they ask for it. And sometimes their needs are met. Sometimes they can meet their own needs, right? Yeah. You don't always need your partner to meet your needs. Or sometimes you're just asking the wrong person.
Yes, exactly.
And that's okay. It doesn't, but it also doesn't mean that the other person is bad, is wrong, is unhealthy, they're just not your match, right? And we tend to do this a lot. I think it's it's disappointing to me. Like I see a lot of memes and rhetoric, that you break up with someone, well, they were a narcissist. Well, they had a personality disorder. Not necessarily. It could just mean that really you weren't able to meet each other's needs. And that's okay.
It's actually something you said to me struck me, when a dismissive is an 8 in how much they care about you, but their fear is a 9. Well, that to me is they're just not into you.
No, but you see, it was situational, right? Because it was situational. So the fear came online after you spent a weekend together talking about the future. So it was very specific in the situation. And then a couple of weeks later, the fear diminishes because the pressure diminishes. So the fears come online and then they diminish and they come on. So it's not like a constant state. That's why you see a little bit of push-pull.
But it occurs to me, and this is where, if you are genuinely, this is where it gets tricky. If you're genuinely in love with someone and you're butting up against your fears, the question becomes, are you willing, does this person care? Do I care enough about this person to say, I'm going to work on my shit? Okay. Or am I just going to let my fears take over? And I'm just speculating here, because it seems to me a significant percentage of people, particularly more so avoidance than anxious, retreat instead of facing their fears with their partner. Like, that's the whole point. You called in this person in your life to work on your shit, and then you take the easy route by running away.
It's not an easy route, actually.
No, I know. Well, I mean, okay, let me retract that.
It's really, I mean, it's very difficult for the anxious person, right? So the anxious person's activating, and then the dismissive person is deactivating. So this is not an easy dynamic.
Okay.
So I do understand that, but there's a certain level of learned helplessness that dismissive avoidants have learned because they weren't modeled how to work through difficult relationships together. So it's not uncommon. It's actually, let me rephrase that. It is common to hear a dismissive avoidant saying, "I can't do this." Yeah. And they actually mean it. "I can't do this. I don't know how to work through this emotionally charged moment. And so I'm afraid that I'm going to say something that's going to be really mean because I'm overwhelmed with my feelings right now. And so I'm just going to step away." So most of the time they're stepping away as a means to regulate their own nervous system, whereas the anxious preoccupied is doing the same thing. So it's like when you say, let's say you and I are having an argument, let's say, again, I'm dismissive, you're avoidant. I'm dismissive, you're anxious. Yeah. And your instinct would be, "Listen, Bev, we need to talk about this right away. I can't go to sleep angry." Yeah. Because you need that to regulate your nervous system. So when you realize that two people are both trying to do the same thing in complete opposite ways, that's where we're coming from.
So so here's the difference if it were you or I versus, for lack of a better word, the average person. First off, we are acutely aware of our individual attachment styles, for number one. We have done a lot of individual healing going back to the source of where this attachment style has occurred. We've also both individually processed and navigated our past relationships and have closure and have come to a place of peace with our past relationships. You and I are the exception, not the rule, if that were the case.
Well, I have to tell you that it's such a beautiful time, I guess, in the world of attachment theory, because like when I look at, for example, the first discussion that we had, I think it was last October or whatnot, the response from your audience in regards to this topic, and then folks who reached out to Securely Love to work with us on their attachment fears, it was amazing. Okay. So I like to think that people are catching wind of
I'm spouting at the top of my lungs at the top.
I know you are. I know that we at Securely Love, we've actually expanded to a group of 5. We're now a group of 5 practitioners that are working with folks, because what we realized is that the biggest impediment to working with someone is availability and accessibility. So it's sort of like when you're going through a relationship, distressed moment, you want to speak with someone now, right? Not in 3 months from now. So we've actually we have a number of practitioners that'll work on this. I'm telling you that it's really heartwarming to see that people are very much.
I'm in full agreement. By the way, we have another question that came in from Annika. So let's address this one. So how can an anxious and a dismissive avoidant be together? I was in one as an anxious and it didn't work very well, emotionally draining. So how can an anxious and avoidant work it out?
Yeah. Did you say the writer's name was Monica?
Annika.
Okay. Hi, Annika. Great question. That's the one we see all the time. It's so interesting because you think, how do these people actually find each other? They're emotionally, they're so different. But that is usually the attraction. That's the draw. So attraction is an interesting thing. We tend to be attracted to those that meet our subconscious needs. Or are displaying traits that we've repressed. So there could be some things about this individual that you found to be super attractive. Like the fact that they're so independent, or that they know how to say, this is what I want, because generally they're quite honest. They're quite forthcoming. If you ask them a question, they'll tell you. So those are qualities that perhaps you really liked in the individual. So that's what, drew you to that person. Now, as an anxious preoccupied, one of the things that is your biggest challenge is setting boundaries. Boundaries is not something that is natural to you. You're generally giving and giving and giving of yourself. It's a trauma response. It's called people pleasing or fawning. And whether you realize it or not, subconsciously, it's you give and give and give because you're afraid the person will leave you. So it's generally driven by the abandonment wound.
Yes.
So what I tell anxious preoccupied folks is, if you want to engage with someone who's more on the dismissive end, take some time to understand your own needs. What are important to you? So if emotional connection is important to you, then identify that and communicate in a way that the dismissive will actually understand. So understanding that a dismissive avoidant generally came out of a home where they were exposed to a lot of heavy criticism and neglect. Okay. If you speak to a dismissive avoidant in a way where you're not criticizing them, that will go a long way, right?
Got it.
So like, instead of, we never spent any time together, you don't really love me, if you loved me, you'd buy me flowers, stuff like that, right? It's criticism. Instead, you can say something like, I feel like we're a bit disconnected and I'd really like to just reconnect with you. Can we spend some time together on Saturday?
Yeah.
So direct, right? Direct, very practical, but not criticizing. And so the first step is understand what it is that you need. And if you need emotional connection, nonviolent communication. Yeah, that's great. Now, if you need emotional connection, don't minimize that. That's what you need. And not everyone does. That's the thing. Some people in some relationships are just seeking, for example, physical or sexual connection. And if that's all they want, great. But if you want emotional connection and you also want to connect with someone intellectually, then don't downplay it. That's what you want. That's what you need. That's what fills your cup.
I had a question, so I want to let you finish.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the best things that you actually can do is, once you've identified what you actually need and what's important to you in the relationship, to communicate it, give the other person a chance to say, okay, because they're not going to read your mind, I'll tell you that. So give them a chance to say, okay, I can do this or I can't. And then set a time limit. And that means that, you don't just sort of go with the flow and see where it takes you. You say, you know what, I'm going to tell this individual what I need, and we're going to give it another month or two. And if I don't see the needle moving, then I'm going to walk away. Right.
Well, you just said something really important here. I don't see the needle moving. You see, it occurs to me that when a partner makes a request for a need and the person, is struggling to meet that need, they're at a point where they have to make a conscious choice. Do they want to meet this person's need? More importantly, will they consciously make effort to meet this person's need? Not in a passive, hey, I give you flowers once and expect that to last 3 months kind of approach kind of thing, but really, because I think one of the biggest challenges in relationships is really having a daily practice of attention, affection, and appreciation. And I mean a daily practice. I mean, it's so habitual. The reason why I thought of the show Heart to Heart is because in that show, they demonstrated attention, affection, and appreciation. To me, that's the multivitamin you take in the morning. That's the one you take in the afternoon. That's the one you take in the evening. To really have a healthy relationship. This is my world or my fantasy.
Attention, affection, and what was the third?
And appreciation.
Appreciation.
Because and I'm saying this, I have a little bit of hostility, and it's just my style here. It saddens me how often, let me reframe that, couples aren't engaged in real affectionate and expressive communication. And I don't know, and I want to bring this back to a question for you. It occurs to me that avoidants tend to be, whether they're fearful or dismissive, they tend to not be very expressive outside of the lust or limerence phase of relationship. Those first, when you have the chemicals, going off and everything. But once that subsides, genuine expressive communication about how you feel about your partner is one of the primary frustrations I hear from men and or women who are with men or women who are avoidant. What's it going to take for that avoidant? I mean, well, first off, they have to want to be expressive, but what's it going to take for that to change? Or, well, let me reframe that. Why is it they're not expressive, and what's it going to take for them to change?
Such a great question. So I think what you're saying is they're not expressive verbally.
Yes, verbally, yes.
Okay, because dismissive avoidants are quite expressive, but they generally use body language much more than verbal. So yeah, or you know what, even being in your presence, right? So a dismissive avoidant will show you that they care just by spending quality time with you.
Okay.
So that in itself, right? Or they might bring you a gift. Or they might do something for you without you asking. So they borrowed your car and they put gas in the tank because they noticed it was low. That's how they show you that they love you. So
so we're talking about acts of service from
right.
The
I was going to bring up the love languages. Yeah. So acts of service is very, very big. Words of affirmation would be the lowest.
Yeah.
And they don't need it.
Whoa. Did you just say that for avoidance, words of affirmation is most likely the lowest?
Yes. In terms of how they give and receive.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that was actually, there's been studies on that, and that happens to be the case.
Well, there's been observational studies on that, right? So if you see how avoidance typically will communicate in relationships, we know that it's through acts of service.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't, I want to distinguish the fact that because someone is not communicating in the same way that you need, it does not mean that they don't care about you. That would be one of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And these stories cause a great deal of suffering. So we could have this idea in our head that if this man loved me, he'd bring me flowers every week, because that's what we saw, for example, our father do to our mother, right? To bring her flowers every week, or whatever modeling we have. But this other person has no idea that that's how you interpret love, or that that's meaningful to you. So I think when you talk about things like, and I wrote this down because I like how you categorize it, you talked about attention, affection, and appreciation. And those are beautiful terms that every single person on this planet will define differently. So so this is what's so interesting about language and human behavior, is that you and I could, when we're talking, I could say to you, Jonathon, that's beautiful. I also want a partner who gives me attention, affection, and appreciation. But what that means to me, what affection means to me, what appreciation looks like to me, can be vastly different to you.
So something just occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
When in the date, because I'm a dating and relationship coach, we talk about the initial stages of, first off, just meeting people, is just a conversation in and of itself, just meeting someone, and then being both physically attracted to someone. That's another, when I say the word conversation, I should be saying it's challenging to meet people. It then feels elusive to have physical attraction, and then to have some level of emotional maturity, then to have shared values, lifestyles that are blendable, and then the emotional maturity. These are all like, feels like it continually gets more elusive. Okay. I think for everyone who's watching this and has chosen, and if they choose to go to Securely Loved, which, by the way, everybody, I'll put Bev's website in the show notes so you can click on and connect with her. If you're aware of your love attachment style, then in my mind, that is one of the early conversations to have prior, maybe possibly before there's physical intimacy, but certainly before you give your heart to another person. I think it's radically important to identify someone's attachment style, or identify your own, have the other person identify theirs, and talk about what the needs are before we go down the rabbit hole of getting attached to a person that may be misaligned for you. That's just the thought I have.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Like, I think, dating is difficult because, again, you're looking to connect with someone along those different spheres, right? Emotionally, intellectually, physically, sexually. Like, it's hard. It is elusive. And attachment styles really are, in my opinion, the most significant part of how you're going to show up in a relationship, understanding your own patterns, your own thoughts, your beliefs, how you deal with conflict. And so the more you understand about yourself, right? Always start with yourself. The stronger relationship that you have with yourself, you can be very clear with your partner. This is what I need, and these are my boundaries. Yeah. Right. And you can also model the communication, right? So it's like, I've actually said to, people when I've had first dates, I really don't react well when someone yells at me. I generally just walk out of the room.
Okay.
When I do, I just don't take it.
Would you say that on a first date?
I would say it on a first date if I felt it was necessary, like if the person.
Okay, got it. So there was something that caused you to want to say that. By the way, 61 starting over wrote down, why does love have to be so dang hard?
Yeah. So here's a great answer for you. Because everything in life that's worth doing is hard.
You know what? Thank you for, repeat what you just said, because and I'm going to comment on it. Repeat what you just said.
Everything in life worth doing is hard.
So the fantasy that love is supposed to be easy is for those of us that were raised on Disney and TV shows like I have raised on this, because I do believe it's a fantasy. I think a relationship requires both individual work to show up as emotionally mature as possible.
Yeah.
And certainly is to be really aware of your feelings and your needs and express that. And if your partner can't meet you, then it may not be the right partner for you, setting a boundary and walking away. So I think our world has been fantasized into thinking love is supposed to be easy, and love in and of itself should just be a beautiful thing. That's what love is. It should be a beautiful thing, but cohabitation and relationships are a whole nother ball game.
Well, it is, right? And there is a stage with, the bliss stage, where you get to a place where you do love each other unconditionally, but there's a lot of steps to get through to that stage, right? So I agree. There's a lot of work. But if you're playing with someone who's, at your level emotionally, then you can pass through these stages, with less bruises than the average couple.
Exactly.
Right? Like, so be careful who you choose to play ball with first, right?
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, and that's fair. That's fair, right? So yeah, but relationships, I think parents, if there's any parents in our audience tonight, they would say that raising kids is just as hard as anything as well. We still do it because it's absolutely beautiful, and there's nothing more rewarding, there's nothing more fulfilling in this lifetime than being a parent. But is there one parent that's going to say, it's easy? No.
I love my children with all my heart. I'll be candid with you. I hated parenting. I mean, and hate's a strong word. So let me just be clear. I really disliked parenting. I just did. I didn't like, honestly, I didn't like how vulnerable unconditional love makes a person. I mean, I mean, when you are, especially when you're a protective parent, excuse me, like that was hard for me, because and because I had a fear of something happening to my children. And guess what happened? Something happened to a child and I lost them. So, I don't want to say I manifested the fear, but the reality is parent, and I'm going off tangent. Let me go back. By the way, I'm going to stop that rant. Let me go back to what Jennifer wrote. Yes, love is work. It's finding a partner who you are willing to put in the work into it, and vice versa. That's wonderful. Communication is key to any successful relationship.
I agree. I think Bob Marley actually has a quote. I hope I get this right, but he says that everyone's going to hurt you. You just have to find the people, that are worth it, that are worth the pain. And the truth,
I'm looking for a quote by a friend of mine. So keep going.
Well, so the truth is that I think what you were talking about in terms of parenthood, a lot of people do hold a tremendous fear that God forbid something's going to happen to our children. And I know you went through hell, Jonathon. And I would say that in a romantic love sense, people are just simply afraid that their heart is going to get broken again. But we still do it. We still do it because there is such a strong pull as humans to connect to others. It's a drive that we have for connection and love, for companionship, for support. There's a sexual component there. We're not intended to be on our own, right? We function better as pairs. And so we're innately driven to keep trying and trying. And I do.
Can I read a quote to you? A friend of mine. So a friend of mine said to me one day, we were having a conversation, and he says, conscious attachment. So let's shift it from the word love attachment. He calls conscious attachment. He says, the odds are this relationship will end. But let's find out if it doesn't. You are worth the pain of losing you. And I love that quote. So I made a meme out of it. So there's a meme right there.
Oh, that's great.
Odds are this relationship will end. But let's find out if it doesn't. You are worth the pain of losing you. That's the work. Like when we say the work is butting up against your fears, butting up against your programming and your scripts and going, you know what? I think you're worth it. That's why in my mind, when you said 8 and 9, I'm like, I think you're a 10. Even though I've got 9 in fears, I think you're worth it for me to overcome my fears, to overcome my programming, to overcome it. And I will do whatever it takes to make this relationship work. That's my fantasy, is that when I say fantasy, let me reframe that. That's my wish for everyone, that you meet someone who treats you as a 10 and says, look, I know I have shit, but I'm willing to work on my shit. Are you willing to work on your shit? And I'm using the term shit loosely, not like a bowel movement, but and say, let's do this together because I think you're worth it. And that's what my wish is for everybody.
I hope the same wish. I do, but it starts with yourself. So it starts with understanding your own patterns, because we all have something to learn about ourselves. And once you understand your own mind and you understand what it is that you need, you're in the best position to go out and try and find that person and then communicate it to them. There is no perfect person. So there is never going to be this fantasy of someone who's going to meet all of your needs. But when you understand what's most important to you, like what we talked about in childhood, you received most of your needs met, most of the time, that's what you're aiming for. There is no such thing as perfection, right? Because we're humans.
Yeah.
I do want to make a distinction. I see we're at the top of the hour here.
Yeah, we're going to be coming up soon. So go ahead.
I mean, we talked a little bit about what's the difference between a secure and an insecure person. So, and in terms of attachment style, I'm not insecure, like, I have insecurities, because we all do. But You know, in preparing for our discussion tonight, I was reminded of one of my favorite childhood memories. So when I was
Okay.
younger, my father used to take my sister and I to like these carnivals and these fairs. Do you remember, Jonathan, do you remember these carnivals that would go through town and you would
Yeah,
like
we have one that comes here every year.
Okay, that's great. So do you know the games that they play where there's like a wall of balloons and
Yes.
they give you a dart and you throw the dart?
Yeah.
You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I
Okay.
know what you're talking
That
about.
was always my favorite game. And why is this important? It's a bit of a colorful illustration of the difference between someone who's securely attached and someone who's insecurely attached. So at the beginning of the night, the carnival, you show up at this game and you see the wall is filled with 36 balloons.
Yeah.
Okay, because all the balloons are there. You're the first or second person that showed up to play the game, and the attendant gives you a dart, and you could be all of 7 years old. You don't need any particular skill, but you throw the dart and you're going to hit a balloon.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Because there's so many balloons on the board, you're going to hit something.
Okay.
So if we think of the balloons as being the traumas that we have accumulated over the years, and it's quite illustrative because the number of balloons that are on the wall are illustrative of the amount of traumas we've had. So someone who is has an insecure attachment, they have a lot of these balloons. They have a lot of these traumas that come online. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, too, the balloons are different sizes. You remember that? Some are blown bigger than others. So some are more intense triggers than others. Now, so what happens is that without any real intention or any skill, you put a dart in someone's hand, they're going to trigger you. They're going to pop a balloon because all they need to do is, right? You have so many, you don't even need to aim. This is what happens, right? So these people are very much easily triggered because they have so many of these traumas. Now, what happens when you come back to that same game 3 hours later when the carnival's about to close?
Yeah.
What do you see, Jonathan, when you come back to that game?
There's one lone balloon.
There's one, there's maybe two on the board. There's very few. And they're usually different sizes again, right? They're usually smaller because the big ones have already been popped.
Yeah.
Now, if I put a dart in your hand and I tell you pop a balloon, it's much harder.
Yeah.
Now you got to aim at something real specific to get that balloon. So the difference between someone who is insecurely attached and has all the balloons there versus someone who's securely attached, they have some balloons, but it's far less, and the balloons are smaller, which means that they're not as reactive. Okay. They are generally, if they do react to something, the reaction is far less intense. Okay. Right. So this is it's a real visual way of looking at, the difference. Now, it doesn't mean that someone is bad. It doesn't mean that they have a mental illness. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that what they experience in their childhood, they're still carrying forward as unhealed wounds. Yeah. Now, the great thing about this, and to finish up the analogy, is that we can actually deflate our own balloons. Right? All that hot air, they're stories. They're things that we have put into our own mind and we've drawn conclusions from them. So, but we can actually take the balloons off and deflate them, right? So that they're no longer there as triggers for someone else to explode. And how do we do this? In the same way that we blew them up in the first place and tacked them on the board, right? So how did we do that? Well, we either, we're exposed to something, we heard something, we felt something, we saw something repeatedly that had a strong emotional charge next to it. So the work that we do at Securely Loved is not just about, okay, great, you're an anxious preoccupied. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Now we talk about how do we get those balloons down? How do we start deflating some of these triggers so that you're at a state where you're a lot more emotionally regulated? And when you have less balloons on the board, you're not going to be triggered as often. You're not going to be triggered as intensely. And then you're in this beautiful state where you can actually authentically connect back with yourself and someone else, because you're no longer in fight or flight mode where there's balloons going off all the time, right? That's what we're aiming for, is that,
So I have a question.
Sure.
By the way, and I know we're going to go over a little bit on time.
Okay.
When a secure person meets a person who's either anxious or avoidant, and let's say they have a lot of balloons on the board, is that even that relationship is probably not going to go anywhere? Is that right? I mean,
I never make predictive statements as such.
Okay.
Because we look for patterns, but humans surprise me all the time.
Okay. So just curious. By the way, this is the post I just posted. There is a bullseye and a dart. So, Bev, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Everyone, if you want to connect with Bev, there's going to be a link below in the show notes. Secured love.
No, you had it right. Securely loved.
Securely loved. Excuse me. I got tongue-tied. Is her website. You can connect with her. Obviously she's wise. She's very well, versed in all of this. If you want to work on your stuff, if you want to deflate your balloons rather than popping them, it's better to deflate them on your own versus someone popping them. Then check out Bev's work. Bev, I want to reach into the camera and give you a big hug of appreciation. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. This is such a pleasure. I always really, really enjoy our conversations. And thank you for telling folks again about securelylove.com. I want to reiterate, we are a group of practitioners that are working together, and we do this specifically so that we're available to talk with you when you need it. So at night, on the weekends, tomorrow, it's not just me. I mean, I'm the face that you're seeing today, but the other folks I work with, they're amazing. So you can book with anyone. That's what we're trying to achieve, is to make sure that people have support when they need it. So thank you so much.
Well, look, we're getting all these great comments. Thank you. Please come back. You rock. Thank you, Bev. Nice, super nice. Everyone, thanks for your love. Again, Bev, big hugs of appreciation. Wishing you, everyone, a super duper wonderful, fantastic evening. Be well, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And